The Brown family is one that has long been of interest to viewers, but it is those who are fans of Sister Wives who have been able to see that what is going on behind the cameras and in front of all those beautiful family pictures is that what is being presented is not all that it seems when it comes to their relationships. Through the years, viewers have been able to see what is going on in the lives of Kody Brown and his 4 wives, Mary, Janelle, Christine, and Robyn, and their children. For Mykelti, one of Kody's daughters, life in the family has always been complicated. As a child, she has witnessed the relationships and circumstances of her father and his wives, as well as her own siblings, with a level of curiosity, admiration, and eventually frustration, while people on the outside get to peek into the happiness and perfection of the family only in glimpses, as presented in television programs. Mykelti has had to bear the subtleties of these situations in her everyday life. Robyn is Kody's youngest wife and is very often caught up in the drama. Speculation about the reasons behind Robyn's participation in the Brown family has long been an ongoing topic among fans. While it is clear that Robyn is the caring and loving wife, sources close reveal that it is possible that it is coming across as very controlling. Mykelti started recognizing the kind of patterns that made her very concerned for her sister. Robyn made many choices without consulting others, created policies that were very biased, and used manipulations on those she felt were not quite as powerful in the household. In regard to Mykelti's situation, the behaviors she is referring to went beyond mere annoyances. Those actions indicate larger issues at play. From Mykelti's perspective, she thought Robyn's behavior was showing their family had a hierarchical structure in which the needs and feelings of certain individuals would come before those of others. This feeling is one of frustration and desperation. Try putting yourself in a household where your thoughts don't matter, where your contributions mean little, and where even your presence is not valued. This is exactly the experience Mykelti has had with their household for years. This tension did not develop overnight. It was a gradual build, fueled by tiny situations that continued to add up over the years. Maybe it was a comment that was glossed over during a family conference, or a plan that was made without considering Mykelti, or witnessing Robyn receive credit for projects that she didn't initiate. Whatever these were, they all eventually added up in Mykelti's mind to create a picture of favoritism and disparity. Meanwhile, Mykelti observed how the rest of the sister wives were dealing with this situation. Some attempted to address Robyn, while others opted not to say anything to avoid a possible fight. Mykelti appreciated their restraint, but also noticed the price of silence. This is because unexpressed anger had a way of simmering. So much so that petty issues resulted in massive emotional burden. Months later, Mykelti started to grasp the truth. Silence was not an option, especially if it led to a long chain of occurrences. There was another level of tension from the perspective of the children. With this unconventional family dynamic, the children had to not only contend with their own familial relationships and issues, but also the demands brought by the adults surrounding them. Mykelti had been realizing the extent to which Robyn's decisions had not only been affecting the wives, but were also setting the mood for the whole household. Domestic disagreements and activities involving the children had been reaching the point of ridiculousness, and the children were left caught up in the middle of it all. This was the very worst part of their household for Mykelti. There have been rumors in the media and among fans regarding favoritism and loyalty within the Brown family. However, in most instances, things are far more complicated. Mykelti observed how alliances were constantly changing depending on Robyn's decisions. leaving certain family members out. Microaggressions, such as decisions being one person's shows or opinions being dismissed or overlooked, may seem trivial on their own. Nonetheless, when taken together, they began to form a kind of behavior on Mykelti's part in terms of frustration with Robyn. Even before the explosive argument, Mykelti did the best she could to raise her concerns in a diplomatic manner. She asked Robyn and the rest of the family for understanding and compromise. However, more often than not, the talks ended in defensiveness, misunderstandings, or simply nothing happening. It was very frustrating for a person who believes in honesty and fairness to not have any dialogue happening. It only reinforced the thought that nothing would come out of speaking up, but the urge to do so intensified each day. Fans might not be aware of how difficult life can be for non-traditional families. Having a lot of money, living space, managing times, and chores are all complicated. For a family like the Brown family, with several women married to one man and a whole bunch of offspring, things could easily escalate. Mykelti Brown understood that, although it may be a pain in the neck to lack balance and proper communication, it truly did affect everyone emotionally. The struggle was already simmering to the boiling point by the time the conflict occurred. Mykelti had been living and observing and trying to find her place for years among this intricate family dynamic, with one eye fixed firmly on not upsetting the apple cart. With each dismissed perspective, with each suppressed slight, and each injustice, Mykelti's patience had been wearing thinner and thinner. It's easy to assume from watching the show that this is just typical family sparring and all in fun for the audience to view as scripted television. But for Mykelti, it's all very serious indeed. Ultimately, however, Session 1 is about tension, but it is also about the slow build towards frustration that might occur when someone has been unheard, underrated, or dismissed repeatedly throughout the years. This is about how little moments throughout all those years can build towards something of a pressure cooker of emotions. And for Mykelti, it appears to have finally reached its boiling point, where silence would no longer be possible. Therefore, by the end of the session, the viewers are aware that there was no sudden and dramatic meltdown without a reason. Years of observation, thinking, and emotional work have been put into it. Mykelti's ultimate showdown with Robyn is not impulsive. It is inevitable and a necessary outburst of emotions that have been festering for much too long. The session would be interesting to Sister Wives viewers because it provides more insight to the complex dynamics of the family relationships that are not always visible. The session lays the ground for the confrontation to occur, because it helps the audience put themselves in Mykelti's shoes, to realize the significance of the phrase, "You treat us like parasites." Family tensions had been building in the Brown family for years, but what actually served as the catalyst for Mykelti to speak out about these issues was something that might have seemed like any other ordinary occasion for fans who were not aware of what was transpiring. It seemed like it could have been any other casual meal or conference. But for Mykelti, all of these engagements were loaded with significance. The Browns have traditionally run a well-organized household, with systems in place to preserve happiness among family members. However, as seen many times by viewers, achieving happiness in such a large family is not easy. Robyn, who is considered the youngest wife, is often at the forefront of planning and making decisions. She wields power when it came to scheduling, money, and even details, making others feel as if they are not part of the decision-making process. Although some members of the family took it in stride, others, like Mykelti, felt very suffocated by it. She observed too many instances where whatever Robyn wanted was considered set in stone, leaving very little space for others' thoughts and opinions. However, according to sources, the way that things started off at this particular gathering was much like what had been seen before. There had been polite talk, shared food, and laughter. However, what had been bubbling just below the surface was a sense of unspoken anger and frustration. Mykelti had been prepared for things to go just as she had been fearing, with unresolved issues from the past coming bubbling out into the open. The initial flashpoint was over something that appeared to be very insignificant, something to do with the allocation of family duties. Robyn had made an announcement about chores and other domestic duties assigned to each person without having any consultation whatsoever. It may appear to have been very innocuous to the outside observer, but for Mykelti, it was just another example of what was happening regularly in her life. Decisions were being made without taking any thought for the input that was or could be required. When Mykelti attempted to relay her thoughts, the feedback was discouraging. Robyn, who was confident and outspoken, began to defend herself, claiming that she was only trying to help and keep things organized. While someone may have taken her explanation at face value, Mykelti understood what was actually happening. It had nothing to do with organization. It had to do with control. When Robyn spoke first and made all her own decisions, she had created an environment where people felt invisible. There was also tension from the emotional undertones involved in this social interaction. Mykelti had been observing over the years how certain family members were aligning with Robyn, whether this was through conscious or subconscious behavior. There were very subtle undertones involved in this social interaction: nods of approval, smiles of endorsement, and certain gestures pointing towards loyalty. These little things were just enough to heighten Mykelti's feelings of isolation and frustration. It wasn't about feeling unheard. It was about the effect it had on the younger generation. Robyn's parenting style affected the younger children. According to Mykelti, Robyn had certain rules, certain expectations, certain ways of giving out the attention, resulting in some children feeling left out or restricted. The problem wasn't personal for Mykelti. It was the influence it had on the whole family. There was a certain responsibility towards voicing her opinion, towards making it fair and reasonable. But it took a certain degree of strength, a strength Mykelti had yet to build. However, the tension heightened with the emergence of another small issue. This time, the issue was about the distribution of time with the family. Robyn, as usual, made the decision unilaterally. Mykelti attempted to offer an alternative in a polite manner, taking into consideration the need to give all an equal share and time to contribute. However, the effect was the same. She was dismissed with a twist of condescension. Robyn's reaction was not actually fiery, but had a little undertone, suggesting the final say rested with her alone. This is when Mykelti had had enough. The days before the showdown were spent by Mykelti thinking through her emotions. She jotted down her thoughts, weighing the possible aftermaths, searching for the perfect phrase. Of course, she understood that speaking out would lead to a conflict, yet she was well aware that holding back would only lead to more aggravation. This internal conflict was unbearable for her. Wait some more, hoping for a positive turn of events, or take a brave step and finally deal with it. The decision, in the end, was obvious. She couldn't keep silent. This was the point at which Mykelti felt like she finally reached an epiphany and triggered what would later go on to become one of the greatest meltdowns in reality television history. Mykelti feels that now it is time to assert herself and stand up and say what is true for her, no matter what it might do to upset the apple cart of their little family. All of their suppressed feelings and resentment have reached a boiling point. One thing that is very important for the fans is that this is not an instantaneous spur-of-the-moment and reactionary act. This is the end result of some serious reflection and hard work. Mykelti had invested all these years analyzing family dynamics and trying to understand the patterns and find ways of making her voice count in this rather complex family, where her voice is often not being heard. When the day of the confrontation finally rolled around, Mykelti's emotions were running high. Mykelti's frustration with Robyn wasn't something that would boil over into a rash, irrational display. It had been simmering for years, and she was prepared to express that when she confronted Robyn. Fans of reality television shows often pick apart dramatic confrontations on shows like this and decide that it's all just acted out for the audience's viewing pleasure. But with this particular situation, the confrontation and emotional experience were real and deeply needed. The trigger, in sum, was a perfect storm of dismissals, unilateral actions, underhanded favoritism, and the personal impact it all had upon herself, as well as the younger generation of the family. Mykelti knew she could no longer afford to keep her mouth shut. She could no longer be silenced if she intended to take back control of her own life. She had reached the point where keeping her mouth shut would not only be painful to her, but could also be the potential catalyst for the perpetuation of bad behavior within her family. In watching this trigger, the viewer is able to understand the impact that the argument that followed is having on the two competitors. This is more than an argument. It is the expression of frustration and experience over the past few years. This is the point where Mykelti has had enough of having her feelings disregarded and is now ready to take a stand against Robyn. The tension had been building for years, simmering just below the level of the Brown family's normal everyday activity. Mykelti had spent untold hours observing, reflecting, and grappling with questions in her mind about Robyn, about whether she should express her frustration with Robyn. By the time the confrontation actually did occur, it was more than just a reaction. It was the natural outcome of years' worth of emotional tension and perceived imbalance. The fans who watched the attraction unfold realized that they did not just get to see a disagreement between siblings, but rather a clash of emotions left unspoken and the need for respect. It happened during what was meant to be a normal family gathering. On the surface, it appeared to be just another typical gathering. The wives chatted about the schedules, the children mingled in the background, and Kody did his job of staying calm and refereeing the opinions. But for Mykelti, it was her truth reveal. Every look, every casual comment, and every gesture from Robyn was a remembered experience of all the times when she knew she was not listened to, not considered, and not originally incorporated. But the argument started with subtlety. Mykelti attempted to reason with Robyn, explaining calmly why she disagreed with decisions Robyn had been making on her own. She talked about equity, about making sure each person had an opportunity to be heard. Robyn, never one to lack confidence or passion in her opinions, dismissed Mykelti's concerns. "I'm just making sure everything is run efficiently," Robyn argued calmly. Robyn's response might have placated others, but Mykelti knew differently. Mykelti understood this conflict not as one of efficiency, but power. While the conversation was still ongoing, Mykelti's frustration escalated. She could not hold back the feelings she had accumulated over the years. She blurted out something that made the rest of the people present in the meeting scandalized with shock. "You treat us like parasites. You think we're here for your benefit?" The room fell silent. Even Kody, who had a background in mediation experience in numerous disputes in their family, seemed shell-shocked at this point. Robyn's eyes were wide in shock at the intensity of Mykelti's expression. There is a brief pause where no one said anything in this silence filled with tension. However, It is the dynamics of truth that made this confrontation so volatile. It is not only the spoken language that is hurtful, it is the truth that it holds. Mykelti is not attacking Robyn so much as expressing what has been bottled up inside of her. She talks about how her wife's actions have affected them all, from the wives to the children. She describes patterns of inclusion and exclusion that have led to members of the family feeling hurt. Robyn, not unexpectedly, began to defend herself. "I'm only trying to help this family," she said firmly, but with composure. "Everything I do is for the benefit of all of us." However, Mykelti did not accept this rationale. "The intentions were there," she said, "but the end result was inequality and someone's frustrations." Mykelti pointed out that having control within a family was not just an element of effective parenting, but included understanding and valuing all points of view. The argument escalated quickly, with feelings running high. Mykelti's statements stung because although she could have been speaking generally, she could back up every point she made with something that each of them could relate to in terms of experience. She talked about times when decisions have been made without getting everyone's input, when their voices haven't been heard, when their opinion, along with everyone else's, hasn't been counted. They just fed the fire that was already roaring inside of everyone, making it difficult for Robyn to find the right thing to say without appearing to be on the defense. Other members of my family tried intervening, but this is not a moment that could be facilitated. This is not about looking for common ground in that moment, but rather acknowledgement and taking responsibility. Mykelti wanted to be heard, and finally, she is not letting the conversation be steered or deflected. This is not about winning and losing, my friend. This is about finally being able to express the reality that she has been carrying around inside of her all these years. One of the most compelling factors that have made Mykelti's story so compelling is that of emotional depth. Mykelti was not only angry. She was also hurting, frustrated, and tired of all these years of feeling like she was an outsider in her own family. This emotional expression was not only true to Mykelti's feelings, but also showed the complex emotional experience Mykelti goes through in her unique family dynamic. Viewers of the Meltdown could tell that something profound had changed. It wasn't a rehearsed fight. It was a genuine outpouring of bottled-up emotions. Mykelti's level of confidence shook up the dynamic of the family, like nothing that had ever been witnessed on film before. In challenging Robyn directly about her behavior, Mykelti forced the whole family to confront painful realities about respect and precedence that had been ignored within the home. The fight also underscored the ripple effect of frustration. The feelings displayed by Mykelti were more than individual complaints, as there are certain emotional undertones within the family. Some members felt the tensions, but they were afraid to express their feelings. It inspired the members by observing Mykelti express herself, making them realize their contributions towards the emotional undercurrents. Despite the intensity of the situation, there were points of clarity achieved through the confrontation. Mykelti and Robyn were finally able to express the boundaries and frustrations that had been left unspoken for years through their confrontation. Although there wasn't an immediate resolution to the situation, the confrontation allowed for an emotional release of the pent-up pressure the situation had been causing. This confrontation marked a turning point where the issues were taken out of the private domain and into the public domain. The effects of the conflict caused all the parties to undergo a process of emotional recalibration. This was empowering for Mykelti. She was able to voice her truth, letting her voice be heard in a family that may have previously diminished it. It was tough for Robyn. Now she must consider all the criticism that may not have been anticipated and how her personal decisions might affect other people. The other wives realized the emotional depth of what happened, understanding that unresolved conflict was no longer an option. From a viewer's point of view, this episode was interesting to watch, not only because it was full of conflict and tension, but also because it is a situation that a viewer may relate to. Viewer experiences may include a situation in which he or she may have felt that his or her voice is not being heard. Mykelti's bravery in speaking out is one thing that appealed to the audience. However, at the end of it all, it is session 3 that is the pivotal point in the entire story, as it is the meltdown that all the fans have been waiting for. The confrontation between Mykelti and Robyn was an experience that exposed all the realities of living in the Brown family, and it was so much more than an argument because it was an expression of one's worth and a defining moment. The struggle between Mykelti and Robyn also had not only ended with the argument of hot words, there had been a rippling effect for the Brown family. This had only begun with the argument and had continued on into an emotional tornado that each of them had not been prepared for or expected to handle. This had been especially difficult for this family since they have lived their entire life within the public eye. This sparked an immediate change in the ambience of the family after the meltdown. Members who were previously mute and inactive during the heated exchange were now compelled to deal with what was playing out right before them. The family was clearly affected by Mykelti's outburst, not only because of its vehemence, but because of the truths that were revealed. Not many of them had not yet verbalized, even though they knew them to be true. Not long after, the other wives also attempted to broker a truce, feeling as though the unity of their little family was on the brink of being shattered. While some wives, such as Janelle and Christine, acted as peacemakers, promoting the value of calm communication and understanding, their actions could not easily dispel the emotions felt with the powerful words from Mykelti's lips. The emotional consequences were complex and had multiple dimensions to them. There were some members of the family who were secretly backing Mykelti's side of the story. They understood that her anger was right and not just an overreaction to what she had been saying about one-sidedness and some sort of favoritism going around. They understood the consequences of ignoring complaints and appreciated the strength she had to muster to come forward and make her voice heard. On the other hand, some of Robyn's relatives never hesitated to support her. They always thought that her intentions were genuine, and she was doing things for the benefit of their family. To them, Mykelti could be considered insensitive with his words. This tension was creating a subtle imbalance within the family, and it was bringing out the intricate network of relationships within the Brown family. Even a small dispute over whom to support would make things worse, and everyone would walk on a thin line between their own emotions and family togetherness. The youngsters were also affected by the aftermath of the fallout. Mykelti's argument exposed the strong emotions that the youngsters had probably been aware of for a long time. While some youngsters were confused and shocked by the power of the argument, others were quietly aware of the truth of what had been communicated. Being raised in a large family means that they have become accustomed to being skilled in navigating tricky social situations. However, witnessing strong emotions exposed them to something new. The incident became known rather quickly on social media and among fans. Times have changed, and the anonymity of the digital age means that nothing is private for very long, certainly not in the case of the high-profile family that the Browns are. There were clips and photos and posts flying around everywhere, all of them bringing about discussion, debate, and speculation. Fans were divided over the incident, coming down either on the side of Mykelti, who showed so much bravery speaking out the way that she did, and appearing to be the only voice of reality in the too-perfect family controlled so tightly by Robyn. The incident on the internet added another perspective on the aftermath. For the Browns, who knew the value of public opinion, this fight meant that the aftermath had implications beyond the family boundaries. Each member now needed to deal with their own feelings and the opinions expected from millions of onlookers watching the program. This increased the intensity level of the aftermath itself. In their family, talking about the brawl is a delicate matter on its own. Kody, as the male leader, tried his best to intervene and keep everything in balance, but even his composed demeanor would be stretched. He would listen judiciously, validate individuals' emotions without favoring one over another, and make all parties communicate. All of these done by someone who needs to process a tragic truth about his own family, when made a point about by Mykelti. However, Robyn was compelled to introspect. It was not the meanness in Mykelti's words, but perhaps because she revealed patterns that Robyn might not have liked in herself. Robyn was determined that she was doing this for the good of her family. However, she did need to introspect. How was she going to make sure that she did not become so dominant in this family that she diminished other people's voices or caused them to feel left out or resentful? The aftermath also showed the harsh realities regarding the nature of the family. Unaddressed tensions do not dissipate, but rather build up over time. The incident involving Mykelti was a precipitating event, bringing the family face to face with problems that had long been simmering. The words spoken during this incident served as a mirror for everyone involved, reflecting not only the sentiments of the individual, but also the sentiments of others who had been experiencing similar circumstances. During the subsequent days following this encounter, there was purposeful activity to improve communication among the family members at their meetings. Although not all problems could be solved instantly, it should be noted that this conflict provided a venue for discussions to take place regarding some much-needed reflections within the family's relationship against its common way of accommodating easy fixes when it came to disagreements. This Fallout episode is especially interesting for its audience because it depicts what it means by being emotionally truthful. Conflict is commonly presented in reality television programming. While reality television programming is meant to showcase conflict for its entertainment value, being emotionally truthful has consequences that members of the Brown family are only just discovering. Mykelti being emotionally truthful meant that the entire family was forced to confront realities because conflict is also an indicator of growth. The aftermath also instilled the value of accountability in the family members. Each member was required to take stock of personal behavior, personal motives, and communication patterns. Mykelti's altercation was more about awareness than pointing fingers. The fact that the young woman was so candid about airing her emotions to the siblings showed the importance of effective listening, understanding, and fairness in the domestic setup. This was all the more important in the sprawling family setup the Browns have. In the end, Session 4 makes it clear that the aftershocks of a confrontation can be just as interesting and telling as the confrontation itself. It makes clear how the effects of a confrontation can spill over from relationships and emotions into the way things are perceived before a screen. It makes clear how telling the truth, especially among a family, can turn established patterns of behavior around and make everyone think twice about what they are doing. Following the intense encounter between Mykelti and Robyn, the Brown family found themselves in an emotional state of recalibration. The after-effects of the meltdown did not just affect the feelings of the family members, but had an influence on all levels of the household and even extended to how the members of the family saw themselves and one another. Though the meltdown had an empowering effect on Mykelti, it brought with it complex levels of reality checks for the entire family. Nevertheless, right after the intense argument, there was a tense atmosphere in the household. Even conversations that were previously casual and cordial now were laced with undertones of questions such as, how will the family bond be affected by all of this? How will each of them now be able to move on without resolving any of the resentments that have built up? Each of the family members was well aware of the fact that the argument had brought to the surface several emotional truths that could no longer be denied, not even by Kody. As for Mykelti, the reaction had been one of relief and nervousness. First of all, there had been the liberation. Finally, she had been able to express sentiments she had been carrying inside for all these years. Then there had been the validation, since other members of the family had been feeling the same way and had been keeping this to themselves. They had been expressing their agreement. Nevertheless, this empowerment was not without its own set of problems. Mykelti found herself dealing with the conflict she had generated. While some of the family was in agreement with Mykelti, some people did become defensive or even hurt by a statement she made. The Brown family, with all their relationships and loyalties, were suddenly faced with a difficult situation. They had to admit to past errors and mistakes, and then turn about and find a way to maintain unity. With Mykelti finally speaking out for herself, the whole family was forced to reevaluate how they communicated with each other, how decisions were made, and how they treated one another. Robyn, in particular, had a rich experience of reflecting. Mykelti's remarks had pointed out practices that Robyn might not actually be aware she had been employing. Although she had always thought of herself as a committed and loving wife, this experience caused her to realize the ways in which she had been impacting the emotional experiences of others. She had begun to reflect upon her style of leadership in the household, wondering whether her need to produce order and organization was occasionally interfering with the voices and concerns of others. Other sisters-in-law also struggled to deal with the issue of the confrontation. There were those who found themselves caught up in Mykelti's demand for accountability, while, at the same time, being responsible for maintaining family harmony. They were aware that festering issues would no longer be swept under the carpet, and to deal with them in an open way, though awkward, was essential to the well-being of the family. Even the simplest of conversations would be assessed on the basis of equity. The children were affected too, learning from the very public and emotional scene that unfolded before their eyes was an important lesson about the value of feelings and the sometimes necessary act of speaking out in order to set boundaries and be respected. While it may have frightened and confused the children at first, this experience taught an important lesson about being brave, truthful, and addressing issues early on before things become troublesome. This is the reality of being part of such a large and blended family. In the world outside the family, the reaction to this confrontation from the Sister Wives fan base was intense. Social media was lit up with arguments, memes, and posts from people exploring all the implications of this confrontation. While some people commended Mykelti for her courage to stand up against her family, even when it meant standing up to Kody, others, from the other side of the divide, supported Robyn as she struggled to deal with the size of Kody's family. The important point, however, is the fact that this confrontation showed that conflict in any family, no matter how much it seems to be in the public eye, involves the basic emotions of frustration, hurt, and the search for validation among its members. However, a public response added a whole dimension with respect to the family's reflection. The couple knew that millions of fans were monitoring and dissecting each of their engagements. They were reminded of the fact that family dynamics, even when reality TV is involved, have ramifications beyond the immediate family circle. In other words, the Browns were faced with the task of managing multiple aspects, including those that were personal, as well as those that were external and global. Among themselves, the family has been having deliberate discussions about their relationships. Talks regarding boundaries, respect, and equal treatment have been central to these discussions. The confrontation initiated by Mykelti's incident indicated that silence must end when it comes to addressing problems within the family. Members of the family have learned to communicate their emotions and be attentive to others, having realized that unresolved emotions can escalate because of silence. One thing that was important for the family to recognize is that being in charge in a family is so much more than just having power over others. Mykelti's outspokenness brought back into focus that even with good intentions, one might end up causing problems when they don't take others' views into account. Robyn's realization, together with Mykelti's willingness to speak out, brought home just how fine a line one has to take when offering direction versus domination. For Mykelti, however, the consequences extended beyond the conflict. She came to understand that asserting herself in this situation had altered her perception of herself as a part of a family unit. She stopped feeling as if she didn't belong and was forced to keep quiet and appeased, but she could now hold a certain level of respect, a respect developed through her ability to speak out and be honest about herself by advocating for emotional equity within the family unit. She presented a model for younger siblings who could see through their own eyes the impact of making one's voice heard during a dispute. Ultimately, it became a situation of after-growth, after-understanding, after-calibration. The conflict had been so intense, but it also had such an important role. It brought the Brown family face-to-face with truths, forced them to analyze their habits, and assimilate the feelings involved in their behavior. Not all problems were solved right then and there, but the conflict signaled the start of a new, conscious, and deliberately formulated way of dealing with their personal relationships. This is especially powerful viewing because it proves that conflict and drama in real-life families bear long-term repercussions. Fights are never temporary and do not leave lasting impressions. Mykelti's braveness shows that speaking the truth and being truthful, no matter how unpleasant it is an important catalyst in helping families grow and building better relations.